Okay, let's start with a quick prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Well, we're ending the end of the semester, so this will be our last Bad Catholics Guide class, and as some of you have already astutely noted, there's 7 deadly sins, and we have 6 classes. So either had to fit in 2 in one of the classes, or make a prudential decision to leave one out. And the world talks about lust a whole lot, so I decided to leave that to other people. Today, we're going to talk about envy, the worst of all the deadly sins, which probably strikes a lot of us as strange. We would think maybe it was wrath, being angry at people, or even pride. But Thomas Aquinas, and most of the Catholic tradition after him, actually puts envy as the worst, the most gnawing of the deadly sins that causes the most harm. And, it's one of those words, too, where we often just go, oh, envy, that's like jealousy, and we're going to go, jealousy, really? Looking at someone else's car and wishing you had a slightly nicer car, that's the worst of all sin. But no, it's not just jealousy. Envy is not simply a synonym, but it's very specific and a much deeper problem that gives rise to many other things. So Thomas Aquinas says that envy is sadness at another's good. Don't think about it enough that way, so write it down. Envy. Sadness at another's good. And see, jealousy makes a lot of sense in a world created by a good God. And even though, of course, jealousy is sort of disordered and going over the limits, the fact that we would be jealous of other people having parts of God's creation, well, that's going to be sort of par for the course for fallen man. It would make sense that we would look at a nice piece of art and wish we had it, or at least access to it at all times. Look at someone's good marriage, or someone's beautiful spouse, nice car, wonderful books, etc., and want it. Why wouldn't we want to have the goods other people have? But notice that it's sadness at another's good. And to ever put the words sad and good together in the Catholic sense, you can start to see how emotionally and spiritually devastating envy is. It is exactly getting everything wrong, getting it backwards, misunderstanding. Sadness, of course, on its own is not a bad passion or feeling that we have. It arises quite naturally. What we do with sadness, like we do with any of the other passions, is how we measure whether someone is good or not. But sadness we should really attach to things that are worthy to be sad over. So the sadness that God doesn't get the praise he deserves, or the sadness that this or that person we know, or entire groups of people are alienated for the love of Christ, or even sadness over people getting the basic necessities of life. But sadness at another good is diabolical and exactly opposite of what everything is intended to be. So put that way, this vice seems to amount to almost pure form of malevolence. You can even, I don't want to say make an excuse for it, but you can even understand the logic of people that would harm others to get a good that they want. But it's more spiritually devastating to be sad that others rejoice and to be happy when others lose the goods that they have. So Thomas wants to make a very critical distinction. And I think he actually, if I'm not mistaken, breaks it down into 4 different ways that we commonly confuse what envy is before we actually get at the root of what it actually has going for it. Such sadness may appear in 4 ways. In one way, when you grieve at another's good, inasmuch as therein you have cause to fear for yourself or for other good men. Such sadness is not envy and may be even without sin. So Gregory the Great says, it often happens without loss of charity, that an enemy's downfall delights us, and without reproach of envy. And his elevation makes us sad, because by his fall we think that some are raised up who deserve to be raised, and by his advancement we fear that many may be unjustly oppressed. So John Zmirak in his typical way. So it's okay to some point to cackle savagely when candidates with evil views get only 19% of the vote, and leaders with wholesome programs fully compatible with our faith take power. Not that this ever happens, but it's nice to know the theory. So, in theory, we can actually be glad that evildoers don't win out, or that they get taken away from office or from a position of power, and that we can actually be sad when they gain the power to do wicked things. Envy is not simply hoping that things turn out right. So, first easy distinction to make. He continues, in another way, we may be saddened at another's good, not because he has the good, but because the good that he has is wanting in us. And this is properly emulation. If this emulation is about the goods of virtue, it is praiseworthy, according to the text. Be emulous of better gifts. But if it is about temporal goods, it may or may not be sinful. So St. Paul wants us, he says, to run the race towards virtue. And Benedict the Great, Saint Benedict the Great, will say, the only thing that you should contend with each other is to try to outdo each other in virtue and service towards one another. So we do emulate the saints, we emulate heroes, we emulate people who are virtuous. But notice yet again, this is not sadness at what someone else does well, but the way we reflect on people whose life we would like to attain. So when your best friend drops way more pounds than you through an exercise program, says John Zmirak, I think he must have wrote this chapter on a diet, he brings up dropping weight a lot. Your sadness might be good, bad, or indifferent, depending on what or for whom you wish you could lose the weight. So, if you want to do it because you're healthy and someone else is healthier than yours, maybe that's a good sadness to get you up off your butt. I don't know how that feels, so I just keep eating. So, in a third way, a man is saddened at another's good inasmuch as the person to whom the good comes is unworthy of it. Such sadness concerns riches and such like gifts, as may accrue both to worthy and unworthy. And actually, Thomas makes a separation between Aristotle and himself here, one of the rare occasions. Aristotle calls this righteous indignation and thinks it's virtuous to be saddened at someone else getting something that you deserve or someone else does. But Aquinas says that in the light of the eternal goods, in the teaching of the faith, this sort of sadness is forbidden, not so much that in it and of itself it's evil, but that it's more likely to habituate us to care about things that are not ultimately important. So it's true, in some small way, it is righteously indignant to think that the evil receive just awards when good and wholesome people often have to struggle to get by. But the exercise of being indignant at these things does not have the proper horizon. It does not think about the fact that God and the eternal life with Him is far more important than any sort of rectifying of mere fortune. But it's also a bad practice to get into. We start bean counting about who deserves what. We will often, of course, think we deserve more than we actually do, and we will often be contentious at the people we bean count against. It's much more, of course, to worry about, as I say to my kids all the time, their own business, because no one is a bean counter like a 3-year-old. Our 2-year-old is, almost 2-year-old, is in the phase where they can grab the crib and get really jumping pretty good, right? Because all a crib is a trampoline at some point. And so both of the older ones multiply come in. Mom, Dad, Nia's jumping on the bed. I thought you should know. Or like, time to worry about your own business, right? Because it's not ever she's keeping us up, or it's making me mad. It's just, you should know, Mom. In fact, I think a few times, like, go get her in trouble. So, worrying about the bean counting of small things is not good for our souls. even if we do have somewhat of a right to say, why do some people get more than others? And Boethius is the Consolation of Philosophy, is a good meditation on this whole phenomenon. But finally, there's the fourth brand of sadness that St. Thomas brings up and condemns as the pathogen of envy. In a fourth way, a man may be sad at the goods of another, inasmuch as the other surpasses him in good things. And this is properly envy, and is always evil, because it is grief over that which is matter of rejoicing, namely our neighbor's good. So we start to see the difference. If you're worried that a tyrant gaining power or winning the lotto will be, those machinations will be used to bad ends, you're right to worry. And you're right to be happy that someone proven themselves to do evil can no longer avail themselves of some sort of good that empowers them to do that evil. You're not bad to look up to people and be saddened over the fact that you are not as good as them if it compels you to act better. And even though it's not atrociously bad, if the bean counting does us no good, but to look at other people's goods just in the fact they're goods and envy the fact that they have good and we don't can only be horrible to the soul. And the flip side is the same. To wish to be happy at someone's evil, to be happy at someone's bad fortune, merely as bad fortune, is always poisonous and causes ruin. So while other vices amount to exaggerations or distortions of wholesome appetites, so marital bliss with lust, glory, justice, with anger, pure envy craves evil for its own sake. It wants evil to occur for another human being. We're not just talking jealousy, not even in the sinful sense. Jealousy means that we see what other people have and wish we had the same a little bit better. So we might see some celebrity on TV and wish that we had the life they did, but that doesn't quite get to envy. For envy to enter the picture, you'd have to, John Spirak brings up Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. But he says you can imagine someone becoming obsessed over the details of their marriage, taking delight every time they have a public feud, laugh when they lose property or demonstrate their spiritual deficits, saying things like, again in pure John Spirak form, yeah, enjoy those Mediterranean beach vacations, Brad. Come Judgment Day, you're headed for someplace a whole lot hotter. That, of course, is the sort of envy that does none of us any good. He points out, of course, that the reason envy is so appealing is that it's like an all-purpose pain reliever. It's really easy to delight in the sorrow of others and to wish that you had more. So he gives examples. I've known married Orthodox Catholics with large families who compensate for the fact that they drive a battered crap brown minivan crammed with squabbling toddlers by speculating about the contraceptive habits and spiritual state of richer folks with fewer kids. So they say things like, that priest should read, I love the culture of death. He's known working class Catholics that visit a parish in a posh neighborhood and spend the entire Mass pricing people's appearances. People who decide that the entire first world has got their money by ill-begotten gains, they don't deserve it, and that for no reason, or for no distinctive reason about what they've done, all of their money be taken away. Latin Mass Catholics whose bishops have shut them off to mental hospital, chapels, and funeral crypts, he says, who mutter with grim satisfaction when some sort of scandal hits the church or some particular place gets closed down. And boy, howdy, have I heard all of this stuff as well. That instead of hope for a better resolution to their lives, takes horrible, pitiful pleasure when any other sort of bad thing happens to the church just to feel a little bit better that someone else is as low as you. Envy, of course, is the chief sin of the devil. He brings it up later. But the devil, of course, was envious of the glory of God. And to envy that glory of God caused him to do exactly what he did, which is to rebel against the good order that he could have enjoyed forever. And so the devil, in his envious state, knows now that he can never achieve the glory that God has. So now he set his sights lower. The devil now envies our state of life, the capacity to be redeemed, which is blocked off for him because of his own will. So what does he do? How is it that the devil shows his envy more than anyone else? But that he hopes to drag down the human race who has the possibility of redemption. We always have to remember that the devil cannot win. We cannot be Manichaeans who act like God is pitted against an equal force called the devil, like it's some Final Four basketball game, and maybe the devil will win. There is no suspense at the level of God and the devil. The devil is done, and he knows it. But what the devil can do is envy redemption. And what's the favorite thing to do when someone is envious? But take down the person they envy. The devil is a pitiful creature. And what the devil is out to do is just drag one more soul down to despair with him. The devil has no army that he will mount that could ever face the heavenly army. His armies are already defeated. The devil's gambit, the devil's war, is one soul by one soul. Sure, he'll go after leaders to try to take down a whole swath of souls, two birds with one stone type thing. But what he's after is to drag just one more person into the mire with him. It's all he has left. And when we are envious, we reflect the devil the most. There really is nobody out there whose life doesn't look a bit brighter when his neighbors are viewed through the jaundiced eye of envy. Millionaires are free to envy billionaires. As John Zmirak says, billionaires are free to envy vampires since they never have to die, etc. Even deeply spiritual people, and here's the most important part, the deeply spiritual people can be tempted to envy. So we read in stories of saints how their principal persecutors were often their superiors or fellow monks and nuns. You read about John of the Cross, Bernadette of Lourdes, Teresa of Lisieux. They've always found someone within their own communities to persecute them worse. And John Zmirak points out, of course, when we're watching the movie, we always side with the saint. But he says, let's turn things around for once. Just imagine what it would be like if you spent your entire life in a scratchy habit, taking evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience, thereby renouncing the three consolations that make fleshly life worth living in the first place. You've done all that. You're spending your life behind bars. You've put yourself there on purpose for the glory of God. And now who toddles in but some bizarre prophetic figure whom God visits personally, or to he sends his mom? The whole world is begging this person for her prayers or waiting for his next book. This busybody may even be trying to reform your religious order. So in John of the Cross's case, he's trying to take away the Carmelite shoes. What's left to do but wonder if his inspirations are really authentic? The devil comes garbed as the angel of light, Best to test their sincerity from time to time, to see how humbly they really are. Sure, you'll be inflicting some suffering in the process, but isn't that spiritual edifying? You're helping them get to heaven. Ha ha ha. So in a convent or a cubicle, anywhere that we are going to sit around and be able to judge each other, envy comes along to make us assess how it is that we can take down a notch everyone that is around us. And all it does is allow us to look more and more like the devil. The devil, whose envy of God has now cost him glory, and now even has him envying creatures like us, made of dust and ashes. Now, envy comes up and is particularly the great temptation of those who have made any progress at all in the spiritual life. The other sins distract the easily distracted the most. Anybody who's come back to Christianity can tell you the easy sins to get over, and not because they're their own difficulties, but the easy temptations are the ones that are right there in front of you. And they're always based, like we said, on some demonstrable good. God puts us in the desire to procreate so that we may produce souls that can be saved. God has made the world a delectable place, so we want to eat and drink of the goods that God has given, even wrath, all these other things. They're yearnings for good things that God has made. And so, when you're low on the spiritual totem pole, the devil doesn't need to work hard, because God's world is tempting enough to love in a disordered way. That's all the devil has to do. Look here, this is this wonderful thing. God made good stuff. If one is good, why not 10? And that's all the devil has to work on. But when we begin to make progress in the spiritual life at all, that's when the devil knows he has to work just a little bit harder. Just a little bit harder. Envy does work off of this understanding that we all want goods and the goods that God created, but it takes a little bit more of a reflective distance from the object that we are enamored with. It almost, to get really, really tied up in envy, actually presupposes a bit of spiritual knowledge. It's not always the case. There's plenty of people that go ahead and envy people anyway. But when the devil really gets to you, it's the spiritualized version of envy that is the worst. So while we are still wallowing down in the mires of sensuality or resentment, the devil could snicker and turn his back, convinced that the reason the devil is pretty happy acting like he doesn't exist in the modern era is because he's done such a good job at sensual and resentful temptations, that we can present them so well through media or whatever else it is, that him acknowledging that he exists actually gets in the way of the ease in which most of us are tempted. But when we progress just a little further, it's important for the devil to make sure you know just enough about the spiritual life to hang yourself. A little bit of knowledge, of course, destroys you. The devil is more than happy to give you a little bit of rope on which to hang yourself. So as we clamber to the middle heights on our way to true friendship with Christ, that's when we attract attention. Our case ceases to be cold, and the devil, knowing how God works, immediately tries to tempt us right where God is trying to improve our lives. So for a certain type of Catholic, this is when his sincere outrage at the crazed, depressing hedonism that rules the airwaves and the internets can turn them not only into Puritans, but even into world-hating Gnostics. So as Marinac reports, an ultra-traditionalist author that he knows, that used the sin of others to stumble into a worse heresy. So I've read the people and met them myself who decide that sex, because it is so abused, must itself be wicked and evil. And you will hear people say that sex only comes about because of the fall, and that in and of itself it is an evil. And to envy God's ordered creation starts to be the worst thing that could actually happen. To envy the angels, for instance, that do not have bodily concern, is one of the first things that a Catholic who begins to realize things about the spiritual life has to worry about. We are not angels. We are made of a body. We do need to tell Brother Ass, as Francis called the body, that he needs to get in line. But it's much different between getting Brother Ass in line and beating Brother until he dies, which the heretics, the Manichaeans, would like to do. In this way, it is really important, like I said, to bring up, apologize my kids again, that when Christ was saying, "Do not judge lest ye be judged," he certainly couldn't have been saying that never make judgments about people at all. I've said this before, but I say it again. Prejudice in and of itself, of course, is not evil. Prejudice just simply means prejudgment. And so, irrational prejudice is, of course, wrong, but rational prejudice, rational prejudgment makes sense. So I've always said no one on earth should get mad at anyone if, walking through a dark alley at night, they come upon a man with a knife and run away. No one would be like, "You're prejudiced, you should have given them a chance." Like, you should have said, "Well, let's see, hey buddy, what do you want to use the knife?" Stab, stab, stab. That is not wrong. It's rational to be prejudiced. And you say, note to self, meet a man in a dark alley with a knife, wait till daylight to find out his intentions. Run away. Nothing wrong with that at all. If the person walking the dark alley with a knife really wanted to get his point across, he probably needs to learn manners, like put your knife away, talking to people at night. So it's not that when we say, "Do not judge lest ye be judged," we're somehow countering what Christ later says when he says, "You will know them by their fruits." You will know them by their fruits. But it's their fruits that you know. It is not inside their interior motives. You do not know the state of other souls. And you know, the things that he said that constantly hit me the most is it's always easy to come from, you know, a poorer state like Oklahoma, like I did. And we were never destitute or anything like this, but like, you know, many people in Oklahoma, we had the hobby of acting like we were poorer than everyone and everybody else was rich and we hated the rich. And it's not even that we hated the rich, it was just like, hey, make pot shots at the rich, right? They're rich, they'll get over it. That's why it's fun to make fun of celebrities on TV, you know? They're not going to cry too much in their mansions or their Lexuses, you tell yourself. And maybe some good-natured ribbing about certain aspects of life is fine. But if you keep this up too much, you realize that you never really know what people are doing with their money, unless they publicly tell you. You never really know why someone only has one kid. There's all sorts of problems. Some of the greatest Catholics I know have problems conceiving. And, you know, if you go, well, why haven't they adopted? Do you realize how hard it is to adopt? You don't know what is going on. You can't be in someone else's heart to know. You should judge people by their fruits, and the fruits are the public actions that they do. And so it's very, indeed, rational and your duty to avoid people that would cause scandal or to cause you the near occasion of sin. But you are not to judge what people are motivated to do, what they do for. And that is when we begin to envy people. We envy the rich and hope that they do things that ruin their reputation and make them poor. We envy people who have nicer lives than us. We envy people with prettier spouses. We envy people with good marriages. We envy all sorts of people. And to do so is to, in a way, even if they were truly doing wicked things, allow their evil to kill our soul. It's like the evil wins twice. And that is why envy is so bad. It's one thing to make proper judgments. It's another thing, of course, to rationally prejudge situations. But it is a totally different thing to act like we know the hearts of any other human being and can rightfully decide that they don't deserve the goods that they have. It's not up to us. God may very well be giving them goods to try them, to punish them. All you have to do is watch one of those stupid VH1s behind the music special to know that being rich is sometimes the thing that causes people's destruction, just as much as being persecuted with someone else. You do not know, you do not know. And even someone like St. Francis, who so often is misused as sort of the saint of envy, he who willingly gave up the poverty, gave up all his riches and found Lady Poverty, who didn't want any wealth himself, he of course did not end up hating the wealthy. So from a holy ascetic aversion to the snares of worldliness, The devil is perfectly set to pounce and get someone good to make the ultimate misunderstanding. So St. Francis threw off worldly wealth, but he warned his monks of the danger of begrudging those who hadn't. Those followers of his, often called the Fraticelli or the spirituals, who went on to condemn private property as sinful, were condemned as heretics. So even though to join the Franciscan order, one must have willingly given everything away, it was not up to the Franciscans to hate those who had not. And of course, people who have been to Franciscan churches or Franciscan monasteries, yes, they beg for everything they own, but if you beg for money, you have to assume people have money. And so it would be ridiculous, of course, to act like we could throw that all away. Now, the answer to envy isn't, as many moderns think, self-loathing servility. And so, like we've often done for the whole year, you have the vice, envy. You have its neurosis, servility. And the way that we, of course, go against the vice is to get its opposing virtue, which is magnanimity, which is one of my most favorite words to say. Magnanimity. One of the most overlooked virtues that we have today. Magnanimity. Taken literally, the word means expand our souls, acquire the virtuous habit of reaching out towards great things, to enlarge ourselves, but not in glory or mere vanity, but to achieve and advance the good. St. Augustine, actually talking about prayer, says, prayer, of course, does not inform God of anything that God doesn't know. Prayer is not manipulating God. Prayer is not any sort of mechanistic thing. Prayer is for our good. Prayer is literally to enlarge our heart, to receive gifts from God that our heart is not large enough yet for. And so to pray always is to always have an enlarged, open heart for God's gifts. It is literally to have a magnanimous heart, a magnanimous soul, a soul prepared for great things instead of being stuck on the small things. And if there's anything envy makes us do is to have small souls. There's nothing more petty than being happy over other people's misfortune and being sad over someone else's good. It's one thing, like we said, to look at what other people have and say, I want that. This is now inspiring me to go achieve. The best basketball players, French horn players, politicians, teachers, all one day saw someone else do it well and said, I want to do that. And magnanimity is taking that goading, that proctoring, and saying, I will learn to be large and great like them. And of course, along the way, this sort of greatness can trip up in all sorts of ways. Vanity is yet again a smallness of soul. It's a soul that begins to get puffed up, but only stops at its own borders. It's only concerned about either itself or the immediate fame it gets. Magnanimity keeps going past that and wants a greatness for the sake of the thing itself. But envy is the ultimate shrinking of the soul. It doesn't even really care about itself looking good. It cares about the destruction of someone else. It's one thing to look at something great and at least want to steal it, because then you at least recognize the greatness of the thing. It's another thing to look at something great and try to deflate it so it's as small as you. And you see how pitiable and petty the envious soul is. Look at the great balloon, and instead of try to take it or blow yourself up to the size of the balloon, to pop it and deflate it and say, not so big anymore, ha. That's exactly what the devil wants. And every envious soul mimics the devil in this smallness. If envy amounts to looking at others and wishing to drag them down, magnanimity requires that we see others and wish them well. This applies even to our enemies, who we shouldn't give the power to drag us down to their level. If you need a visual here, this is another John Zmirak special. Imagine that a band of idiots starts pelting you with dog turds. Is the answer to drop your hands and knees to scramble for the same kind of ammo? In most cases, no. But the point still stands. When we let people drag us down, even if they're truly have ill-begotten gains, it's one thing to strive for justice. It's one thing to strive for justice, to see someone screwing other people and say, I'm going to fight for justice. It's another to see what people have and say, I'm going to screw them back in the same way. And then you just become them. We look at this in political power and political envy. How many times is it just the tried old horrible story that one regime replaces another and is just as bad as it, that perpetuates all the same crimes, just maybe to different people, but first one same as the last one as worse as the other. This perpetual cycle of envy is the willingness to be as petty as the pettiness you supposedly hate. Now, it's not quite enough to walk off sniffly, dripping in contempt, and this is what he worries about with servility. That when people do evil, we just let the horrible thing happen to no end. But secretly fuming and planning a higher order of vengeance, none of this helps at all either. Instead, we're called by Christ to shrug off insults, forgive, and when it's prudent, forget the slights we suffer. Instead of repaying injuries with interest, we should expand and elevate the objects of our attention, and in a high-minded spirit, wish the best for everyone, even our enemies. I know this as an older brother, the way you really make your older brother mad, or your younger brother mad, is not to, beat them up in any way, but when they start hitting you, to laugh in their face. This is a wonderful glory only older brothers understand. You get in a fight with a younger sibling, you really want to make them mad, let them hit you and laugh at their face. And that's sort of a mean example, but the sort of analogy works. A magnanimous soul is too concerned with higher things to let small things drag it down, to let small insults cause it any worry or anxiety. If the problem is a great enough matter, so justice is a great matter, the magnanimous soul will get concerned and will right the wrong. But if it's not a great enough matter, if it's just someone being a turd and giving you crap, and it's not violating the level of some great justice, the magnanimous soul literally doesn't have the time because it's concerned with bigger things. The best thing, of course, for anyone is eternal salvation. So that's the place to start, by praying for those who persecute you. The only thing the truly magnanimous soul is concerned about is the greatest of all things, which is eternal salvation. If the slights and slings and arrows we face do not cost the eternal salvation of our souls, or the eternal salvation of those in which we have some right regard for, it is our duty to not notice or care. Now that makes a lot of sense, for instance, where while you may take someone being rude to you at the grocery store or calling you names, as a parent, it's your job, if your kid gets called something like that, or even less, if it puts your kid's soul at risk for eternal salvation to be picked on that way, then you must get concerned. You are a magnanimous soul. You are worried about the biggest things in life, which is eternal salvation. If you have a friend whose salvation is part of your concern because you're friends, and they treat you badly, normally, if it was just some stranger, you would write it off. But if it's your friend, and you're a magnanimous soul, and you're concerned about the great things, and the great thing would be for your friend eternal salvation, it's your job to go say, you can't treat me this way. You put your soul at danger to do so. Not because you have some petty concern with how everyone treats you, but out of love and desire for the great thing your friend could achieve in eternal salvation. We can only do so much. So if a stranger treats you badly, This is where prudence comes in. Maybe you have enough time to say, "Sir, I hope you see that this hurts you more than it hurts me." But many of us do not have the time to answer every slight. And many of us don't have the composure to not put ourselves in the near occasion of sin. It's really easy for us if we're just trying to at first be like, "Hey, you shouldn't say that about people. I'm not really all that offended, but it's not nice and it's not good for you." The minute, we can usually manage one really high-minded retort, but then we hear one more thing, then we're like, "Well, right," then we go off and then we ruin it all. So if we can't help someone else be high-minded and turn towards the great things without going towards the near occasion of sin, we should leave that sort of thing to the people that we are bound by the sensible bonds of affection to worry about their magnanimity. So when people do you wrong, praying for those who persecute you is to wish for their greatest good. And of course, praying is the highest thing you could do. You might have to do this with gritted teeth at first, and don't become scrupulous or surrender if your sentiments never fall in line with your will. 20 years later, your stomach might still knot up and your fist clench when you remember the grammar school sociopath who dunked your head in the toilet, the pastor who ripped out your parish's Gothic altar, or the college boyfriend who dumped you to marry your wealthy widowed mom, another John Zmirak. There's no need to confess this feeling of anger. But envy is the next step that tries to hang on to that sort of anger. Anger is not evil. It's even right and good sometimes. And to destroy all anger, righteous anger at things, is to be servile. The sin starts when you stop there and pretend that the person can be summed up entirely for eternity by his sin. And that's exactly what we were saying with Christ. Judge not lest ye be judged. You will know them by their fruits, but you do not know them completely. You can judge their fruits, you cannot judge who they are. This is where the unfortunately often browbeated line that actually is a very telling point, "You can hate the sin and not the sinner," comes to this. Is the judgments that we can have are at the fruit of the action, but it is not for us to judge the interiority of a soul, to condemn a soul, or to envy a soul. He brings up two really good points about this, very poignant ones. What we can't do is wish for the wholesale destruction of our enemies. A magnanimous soul is not small and petty enough to wish for the destruction of someone who's wronged them. They want ultimate salvation. So that's why it would be right to say, "I hope someone is punished," in the hopes that they would change their course. But it is not. Think about how much more envious and terrible it would be if you say, "I hope the person never changes." Or, for us who believe in an afterlife, "I hope this person goes to hell," which would be terrible. We would hopefully say, "I hope the person gets thrown in jail and learns the wrongness of their ways." But he points to Prince Hamlet in Shakespeare's play. And I literally forgot about this. So Prince Hamlet, what he did when he caught his murderous uncle praying, he decided to defer the execution, for he feared that if he killed his uncle on the spot, the old man would go to heaven. He was worried that if his uncle was asking for forgiveness, if he killed him right then and there, he'd go to heaven forgiven. And of course that wasn't good enough for Hamlet. His uncle needed to be punished forever and ultimately die and go to hell. So even the old school IRA, like the 1920s IRA in Ireland, could pull off something better than that. And I know this is crazy to think about it, and Zmirak's not saying this is what we should actually do, but he said, notice the difference. The IRA would actually wait until their enemies would come out from confession, and then they'd kill them. Because the IRA is like, look, they deserve to be punished, but not to go to hell. So we're going to wait to assassinate you after you go to confession. I openly put this on video to anybody who in the future would like to assassinate me, please assassinate me right after confession. That would be very helpful. So Zamirak's point is, if terrorist gangs can keep some vestige of charity, maybe we can too. If the IRA can at least wait to shoot people in the head till after confession, maybe we should be able to say, just for today, I will be as charitable as the IRA. That can be our mantra. But you think about it, right? To wish someone would go to hell, to think someone would never repent, think about how anti the plans of God that is. That's what envy is. Envy is to want something that someone else has so bad that you would be happy evil befalls them. You'd be happy that evil befalls them. Or that the fact that they could celebrate some legitimate good would make you sad. Make you sad. It's screwed up. It's like when, we have this very early on as kids, how many times do you see the other little 3-year-olds actually sad at the other kid's birthday party? Because the other kid's getting the birthday stuff. It's only when we have the magnanimity being an enlarged soul makes sense, right? Kids have small souls. They have to. They're little. It's hard for them to understand stuff. But gee whiz, adults who can't figure this out, petty and pitiable. So St. Thomas follows Aristotle's lead in defining magnanimity as the orientation of the soul towards great things rather than petty things, and honorable actions instead of squalid or base ones. But Aquinas did have to wrestle with the unembarrassed love the pagan Greeks took in public glory. And Aristotle really does seem to think that he's like, you shouldn't want to be vain, but you conquer another nation, you really need to be happy, when we parade you through town with the spoils of war after you. So St. Thomas had to try to square the circle a bit. So how does Aquinas rescue magnanimity? The crowning human virtue, according to Aristotle, but baptize it with humility. We should precisely glory in what goodness or greatness we have really done, attributing it to God, and humbly admit our sins and flaws, accepting the blame for themselves. And looking at others, we can hate the sins for which they are responsible, but love the sinners as creation of God, as we said. And in ourselves, when we glory, Paul says, if you glory in God, what God has done through you. And truly there is magnanimity. Magnanimity is the greatness of soul that is great precisely because it accepts the gifts of God. And it only accepts those gifts if it acknowledges that they're gifts in the first place. People truly do amazing things, but they do those amazing things through God and with God. And magnanimity is opening our souls up to do those things and to be unaffected by the small things underneath. Now, what often gets paraded as the opposite of envy, Zamirak here intriguingly calls unselfishness. And you would go like, well, that's weird because we've always heard we're supposed to be unselfish. So he's trying to really make a very small point. So he points out people like Ayn Rand or Nietzsche who look at Christians and say that their altruism is literally either envy or complete servility. That it's completely giving away to everything. And so he brings up, for instance, there's a novel, The Camp of the Saints, where there's just this group of clergymen who welcome the conquest of the West by Islam and Hindu Indians and simply lie down and let Christendom be taken away, all in the name of selflessness. It is the same unselfishness that C.S. Lewis devils advocate in the Screwtape Letters, that we convince people that what the good of Christianity is not minding that people would trample over the goods of God's creation. Are Christians really called to a profound denial of all self-interest? This is what he's eventually getting down to. And it's funny because this is one place where Christians will sound more like Immanuel Kant, for instance, from the Enlightenment, than they actually do Thomas or Augustine or even Jesus himself. Self-interest, we're not supposed to be selfish, but it would be wrong to confuse that with saying we won't be self-interest at all. The Bible itself says, why should we ultimately want to get to heaven? And of course, part of it is that God deserves worshipers, but it's also in our self-interest. And Jesus and the saints again and again say, do you really want to be happy? If you really want to be happy, this is happiness. In the most fundamental task that faces any of us, seeking eternal salvation, our first motive is the pursuit of eternal happiness with God. We should want to be with God. To want to go to heaven out of duty just doesn't cut it. Yeah, I'll go to heaven. Praise God. That's what you should do, right? It doesn't seem to cut it. If you're not going to love God, it seems like you miss the point of heaven. This is no hedonistic or shallow search for satisfaction, but the proper functioning of a human will as it seeks the goal for which it was created, which God himself surrounded with rewards that rebound to the self and no one else. God doesn't need our prayers and our praise. God deserves worshipers. God doesn't need them. We don't deserve to worship God, but we need to. The alternative, damnation, is equally hedged around with punishments that one will endure by oneself. It seems that the divine economy itself is set up on the assumption that man will pursue happiness and shun unhappiness. And this is how it should be. In the writings of the most mystical saints, we occasionally find a saint who actually ceases to care about the happiness of heaven, so pure is his love of God. However, that is a difference of emphasis and not contradiction. We're mystics like the Quietists, and these people have actually arisen, who actually profess that they did not care whether their souls were damned or saved. When they did that, they were excommunicated. It's one thing to say, I totally understand how I would deserve hell. It's a complete another thing that says, I don't care what happens either way. That, of course, would be to flaunt in God's face the very thing that he is setting up. Now, in the natural order, if man is to reject all self-interest, this must include every sphere of life. On a radically altruistic analysis such as this, none of us should seek out the company of people whose conversation we enjoy, or wed those to whom we attract. You can imagine this. You need to go find the ugliest, most cantankerous spouse. Otherwise, you're being selfish, people. You know that horrible lady that, no one likes because she's mean and brutal and maybe she's secretly killing people? You need to marry her. Otherwise, you're doing it out of self-interest. You know that guy who for fun burns cats in the backyard and is trying to overthrow the government? Probably should go marry him, lest ye be mired in self-interest. We should mortify biology and the future of kids we'd have. Should we do that? Should we pray for unruly children? Should we pray for children that never come to the faith so that we can never have any comfort at all? Equally, Zmirak says he can't see why we should prefer the interests of our own children or family over other strangers or countrymen, if you go over this too much. Strictly applied, such a standard would dynamite the Christian notion of subsidiarity, which ranks our obligations as proceeding outward from the self, with the greatest claims upon us made by those who are nearest, so relatives and neighbors. Perhaps one could make a case that in a strict justice we owe our children nutrition before we owe it to strangers, but in dispensing it we would always have to be careful to disentangle any motives of personal affection or attachment and strive not to take undue pleasure in it. Are we not supposed to be happy that we feed our kids or improve our neighborhoods? It's wrong when you do all of those things to the deficit of anyone else. But does that mean, and I mean strictly like a positive deficit, but look, when you feed your kids, that's bread someone else can't eat. When you paint, your neighborhood fence, That's raw material someone else could have used. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? He'll point out that, why should people continue to have kids? There's so many to adopt. Should we listen to those people who say that we're being selfish if we have large families and that we're hedging a disaster for the future? You start to see, if we take self-interest in a neurotic way to servility, we stop becoming envious, we start being irrational and stupid and unappreciative, ungrateful of the greatness of God's creation. Only magnanimity will steer clear of this wretchedness. And so finally he makes this reductio ad absurdum, this reduction to absurdity one step further. And he says, let's act like all self-interest is totally evil. Then what does it mean when I perform an act of kindness to someone? What if I volunteer to shovel out the driveway? Whose interest am I serving? His. If he accepts that offer, whose interest is he serving? His own. In other words, to do nice things would be causing others to be selfish, which would be putting their souls in danger of hell, which is stupid, which is dumb. God has made human community where we actually learn to take gifts from each other. And part of magnanimity is receiving gifts well. If we're to worry about envy, we shouldn't think of it in ridiculous terms. Magnanimity is to be willing to see with awe what God has done, the amazing things that He has pulled off, that He has shown for us and what He has done. So ending the last bit here, the best that I can show you to do is to point out one saint, which if you haven't got the chance to read or look at, I can't suggest enough. Sabarian calls it a soul too big for England. So St. Edmund Campion. St. Edmund Campion has a wonderful book written by Evelyn Waugh, if you would like to read it. But Edmund was one of these great people, this magnanimous person that you can't make up. They can only exist in real life. He was a wonderful poet and scholar. People were saying he had youthful promise like John Donne. Campion joined the Jesuits, though. Unlike a lot of people who at the time, this is during the Reformation and Queen Elizabeth, if he joined the Jesuits instead of saved himself or kept merely quiet, he became a Jesuit and then he snuck back into England, providing the faithful with the Eucharist and the sacraments and all these things. Knowing that one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite thing to do to priests was to torture confessions out of them and torture, abandonment of the Roman Catholic Church, he wrote an article called The Campion's Brag, which you can look up and find online. Campion's Brag. And it's funny because, it's considered this brag, but it's this letter, this open letter he wrote, admitting up front that they might get him to say things that he wouldn't want to otherwise. But then he brags and says he would dare any Protestant to actually debate him if he could actually do so in any way an equal manner. So for 13 months he evaded capture, very much setting the Queen to anger. And when she finds him, she actually says, look, if you convert to Anglicanism, you'll be made a bishop, you'll have a pretty wife, you'll be paid forever, you'll have a university position, and can write poetry until your dying day. And he, in a much nicer way, flipped her the bird, said no way. And so what did they decide to do? Well, they had this outstanding brag that the Campion says he'll argue with anyone. So they decide to torture him for days and then set up, they're gonna go around England, torture him for a good week at a time, and then set up debates. And so they set up this debate, and he comes out and he looks what they would Zmirak says that he comes out in the equivalent of an orange jumpsuit, for today's prisoner, haggard, bruised, and then unfortunately for them, still beats them at the debate. And beats them so well that they decide that to cut off the good old tour of Campion fighting these people, and they decide it's time to cut off his head. They have a show trial that would, as Zmirak says, make Joseph Stalin smile, and decides that he's to be killed. And so when he would not pray with what the Anglican chaplains furnished, I get confused here. I think it's the last part of the brag he might have said on the scaffold, but I might be getting this wrong. But I read it here to leave you as the last thing before we let go for the end of the year. If these my offers be refused and my endeavors can take no place, and I, having run thousands of miles to do you good, shall be rewarded with rigor, I have no more to say but to recommend your case and mine to Almighty God, the searcher of hearts, who send us his grace and see us at accord before the day of payment, to the end we may at last be friends in heaven, when all injuries shall be forgotten. So getting ready to die, the magnanimous soul says, I wish you no ill. And if it takes killing me to change you, to bring you back to the side of good, I would willingly die. I do not hold it against you, and I ask that God find within your hearts, even though you do me this evil, that little shred of light that could save you, so that in heaven we can be friends. And as Zmirak says, souls don't come in a bigger size. They're XXL, available only at the big and tall soul shops. And that's exactly, in the end, what I'd hope taking a quick tour through 7 deadly sins, at least 6 of them, would provoke, is the magnanimity of soul, and that magnanimity of soul, the greatness that does not need to rebel against every sling and arrow that comes against it, that in the end can even wish enemies good. It would of course be wrong and servile if Campion just left town and sulked away. No. The Church of England was evil. As Zmirak says, you could go tell your Anglican friends, but it's mean to kick people when they're down. It's true. So the Church of England was founded on evil repression of Catholics, and it would be wrong to walk away from that. It would be wrong to walk away from that. But you don't have to turn it into envy. You don't have to envy the goods that the Church of England took straight from the hands of her Catholic ancestors. These beautiful churches, of course, were built by Catholic hands and stolen right from them. Envy would do you no good. To wish harm on the Church of England would wish you no good, would do you no good. But like Campion, St. Campion, the hope we have is in answering the wrong that's done in the hope of justice, that in the end, if the people still would do us even greater harm, that we'd have souls big enough to say, I hope in the end there's something that you too would convert, that you as well. We have souls that big, that no trial in the world will make us shake or change our faith. And so that's what we have to pray for, is magnanimous soul. We have to pray for big souls. We don't pray that God spare us from crosses, because certainly we will all have a cross always, whether it be big or small. And we don't need to pray for God to give us good things. The best thing is heaven, and we need to pray for a soul that wants and can attain that big, great thing. Thank you all for a wonderful year. Good luck on all of your classes as they wrap up, and we'll talk again in spring, or fall, excuse me. Take care.